Well, Jim, let's move away from all that, and we're going to talk about this Vince McMahon story in a bit. A lot of the listeners have been sending it over to hear what you think, but let's get a few listener questions. From the Cult of Cornette Facebook group, Marcus Rose wants to know, what does Jim consider the best storyline in Smoky Mountain history?
Well, best storyline is kind of and I'm not trying to equivocate here, but best storyline, since that's not really a wrestling term, best angle, best program, best, the best program we ever had, because of course it started almost at the beginning and lasted till the end, was me and Bob Armstrong. And I don't mean to short any of the other talent or sound, egotistical or lacking humility by putting myself in something like that, but that was the way it was constructed. Because we couldn't do it every week or even every month, but we could go back and forth, and I could manage people against the Armstrong boys, or Bob could be in the, all the things we did. And it for 4 years, and people still always wanted to see him beat me up or his side to win over my side. And that's what I knew it was going to be from the start. But at the same time, we weren't doing it like a program between the two wrestlers where they're wrestling every month for, on the monthly shows for 3 or 4 months in a row, and then it goes in another direction. That, and the Rock and Roll Express and the Heavenly Bodies probably meant as much or more as any regular wrestling program that we had between two entities, followed closely, I think, by Tracy Smothers and the Dirty White Boy. But yeah, as far as wrestling, when I call them programs, obviously that's the business name for a feud or a rivalry or whatever. The traditional in-ring programs that we did, Rock and Roll and Bodies and Tracy Smothers and White Boy, I think were the most important overall, and also contained some of the best matches. And me and Bullet Bob in and out of the ring as the overriding two forces trying to compete with each other was probably the most profitable thing, or overall box office thing that we did. Well, you saw a bunch of that stuff. What do you think?
Again, we're talking storylines. It's clearly you and Bob Armstrong from the beginning. Bodies and Rock and Roll is a feud that everyone talks about, but it's you and Bob Armstrong. And in terms of Tracy and Dirty White Boy, that would be up there on the list. And the question really comes to, does it end, I guess? If we're talking storyline and a story that's always there, they have the feud, they have the Bluegrass Brawl match. It goes into the three-way thing with Brian Lee in the summer. So technically they're still involved after what is in a lot of ways the blow-off match.
Yeah.
And then eventually they're teaming up, but they have that history there. So in a lot of ways, you could argue that the story of Tracy and Dirty White Boy is maybe number 2 on the list.
Yeah, and we never really got to flesh them out as much as I would have liked as a team. And then by that point, it would have been interesting. I would have turned White Boy on Tracy if I turned either one of them, because I just couldn't see Tracy being a heel in that territory, in that era at that time. But it would have been interesting just to see. He probably would have got us kicked off TV if we were still on it as a heel.
If Tracy at that point had been able to do promos about the Dirty White Boy, it would have been something. Because at that point in time, I was talking to him all the time. And they were friends, but there was like a frenemy situation, or at least on Tracy's part, just you talk to him about something and then all of a sudden be like, he's a stooge. Tony Anthony's a stooge. I mean, I'm sure you must have heard it, because I was hearing it all the time as a 15-year-old.
Well, that's a thing also, is that Tracy would be having a conversation with you where he'd just be talking about something, and then a peripheral name involved in that story would come up, and then he'd just take that 90-degree right to, and he's a stooge, and I'll tell you what he did, and he'd get mad about whatever this fucking guy was he just thought about to talk about him for a second and then go back with the same calm demeanor about the previous story. But anyway, old Nellie Brown.
It was beyond calm demeanor. It was happiness because like
Yeah.
It may have been Tony Anthony. It may have been a few other people. But at one point, because I heard the expression so many times, man, I knock his dick stiff.
Yeah.
But how you doing, Brian? How's it going? Like, he would just all of a sudden cheer up immediately.
I'm not that no good son of a bitch, never respected anybody in this business or the, well, hey, it was like windshield wipers.
Yeah, so I think that's two, is him and Tony Anthony. But you and Bob Armstrong's clearly number one because, again, it's not outward, but technically it starts at the very beginning of Smoky Mountain, right? I mean, it wasn't really until the spring summer of '93 where it really exploded, but it had been there for over a year.
Well, and you could tell, and just either with little asides or just the fact that Bob was the ultimate example of honesty, fairness, and justice, and I was the opposite example of any of those things. He was the example of honesty, fairness, and justice, and I was the opposite example of all those things, is what I'm trying to say. So we were going to get to, and the thing also was I knew I could depend on that long term because I knew I wasn't going anywhere. And Bob was, at the time, I think 52, 53 years old. And it's not like he still didn't look better than a lot of the guys in all the companies and could still work, but I knew nobody was going to sign Bob away from me. And so you could plan long term with guys that you knew would be like that would be extremely valuable. Ron Wright would be extremely valuable to me and my program and almost nobody else's at that point in time because it was national TV and they would have had to start at the beginning and nobody would have got it, right? So I could build around those people as constants, even if I knew that some of my in-ring guys were going to, be back and forth depending on whether they got offers for more money or not.